Hello, everyone. My name is Al. You've seen me a lot on this channel. I'm the owner of Academic Composition. I'm here with Professor Keith Preston, your favorite professor of sociology. Without further ado, the man who needs no introduction. Keith, tell us about why you're such a popular professor. Why do your students like you so much?
Well, I guess you would have to ultimately ask them, but it seems to be differences in style and approach to academia. For instance, one thing that I do is I allow my own students a much greater level of flexibility in terms of how they approach assignments because I want them to be creative and original. I don't just, for example, give a research topic and say, okay, now write an essay on this. I want them to actually do some thinking and come up with topics of their own, as long as they're within the acceptable parameters, and then go and research those topics based on what they find it to be interesting or most compelling and things of that nature. There have been other instructors that I've encountered in academia, including those I've been on staff with, who would do things like there was one guy that stands out that he would fail students if they had more than two absences in a semester, even if they had all A's on all of their assignments. In fact, the administration eventually called him out on that, saying that was being excessive. He wasn't very popular, as you might guess. There was one guy I was on staff with once where he would forbid students from using laptops in class, whereas I would encourage it because I would want them to take notes on type notes, which are faster than handwritten notes, and I'd also want them to follow along things that we were reading, and so forth. And then another thing is I know there was this other staff member once that she would teach by she would just basically take the textbook and put it on a PowerPoint and then basically read the textbook back to them on a PowerPoint. I mean, you can imagine how boring that was. And I've encountered this kind of stuff over and over and over again in academia. And I don't really do it that way. Like I look at it like, for example, the textbook is really just the very baseline. That's just the starting point. And I do have a textbook, and I do encourage the students to read the textbook, but it doesn't stop there. For instance, we use class to basically illustrate and make what's in the textbook come alive. And so that it's something that's more relatable. It's not just a bunch of words on a page written by academics in jargon that's hard to decipher. So for that reason, I think my classes tend to be more popular. I've had former students approach me. Like I know one day I was in the hallway in one of the universities where I teach, and one of my students from the previous semester came up to me, and because she was just getting out of another class, and she was saying, "Yeah, I wish you were teaching this class, then it wouldn't be boring." And I get feedback like that from students quite a bit. So this is fairly a common refrain that I hear from my students. But it's just about differences in terms of style of teaching. I think a lot of academics really don't have much in the way of style. They may have the book knowledge, but as far as communicating it, it's a whole different matter.
And they don't have much by way of personality. As I'm seeing in your reviews that we're sharing on this channel on RateMyProfessor.com, what's your rating? 4.6, 4.7? How many stars do you have, Keith?
I don't really even know because I don't do vanity searches, where I'm looking up.
Well, it's obviously you're never boring and your students love you. You have a sense of humor, but some of your more serious, older peers, they ask you, Keith, aren't you just a joke? I mean, are you an actual professor or what are you doing? Is this a circus or is it a class?
Well, I always get feedback from the administration and from the staff about how popular my classes are. And my students generally have a high rate of success. I don't, have an unusually high failure rate or anything like that compared to other instructors. So it works.
Yes, you're an entertainer. See, that's the thing. There's infotainment, there's entertainment, and there's education, and you gotta meet students somewhere in between. You gotta do all of the above. You gotta do all three of these things. And you're so popular because, well, you teach them in a way that they find fun. Learning's got to be fun. You've got to enjoy it.
Right, exactly.
And what can you tell people like sociologist Frank Furedi from Hungary who wrote a book, Why Education is Not Educated? And one of his arguments is that, well, students are so multicultural in Britain. that they don't memorize anything, they don't respect authority, they need to keep their heads down, they need to stick their stupid noses into books, and if they don't, they just smack them upside the head. How would you talk to Mr. Firetti about that?
Well, that kind of model of education is not dissimilar to what I actually experienced when I was in, say, elementary school in the
Mhm.
70s. When I went to a private church-run school, that was a model of education there. The problem with that is that it's certainly true you can learn things from just rote memorization and that kind of military-like classroom, but the experiential component of it is missing. It tends to be very one-dimensional.
Mhm.
Educational models like that can excel in certain areas, but there's also going to be shortages in other areas. So
Mhm.
it's better to use an approach to education that's well-rounded, that includes a lot of different angles that are converging as far as the educational process.
And Frank Firetti is from Hungary, and as we understand, that country is a little different. It has an Asian background. And my opinion is that Frank is very, let us say, Asian in his understanding of education, and that's not your point of view. You're not a disciplinarian, you're not big in memorization, you're not big in standardized tests, you don't like any of that stuff. You just don't do any of this, right?
No, standardized tests I don't use. The thing where there's one model of testing where you use a Scantron sheet. You give students a bunch of multiple choice questions, 200 multiple choice questions, and then they just mark the circles on their Scantron sheet for what answer they think is best, and you just run them through a machine, and the machine grades them for you. I've had to use stuff like that when I've had really large classes where it's impossible to do it any other way. If there's, say, 300 people in a lecture hall, but for normal size classes, no, I never do that. I mostly give essay exams where they actually have to write an essay in response to questions. And usually these are take home exams. They're not something they're going to come to class and just write about from scratch that day. Although I've done it that way at times as well. But I found it works better if exams are more like a research project.
See, what I find fascinating is that you dignify the student. You bring them to their level, to your level. You bring the student to your level. You don't stoop down to their level of ignorance. No, you bring them up. You teach them how to think like you do. You teach them how to think for themselves.
Yeah, well, it's certainly true that I hold students to high standards. My classes are not just about anything goes. Like I had a student once who asked me, why we don't use cartoons as an instructional tool in class, like he had in, high school or elementary school or something. I said because this is a university, not elementary school. No, we're not going to use. We're not going to be watching cartoons in class. But at the same time, it's good to have, I think, innovative models of education in ways that are still highly competent in terms of conveying the information and knowledge that the students are going to actually need.
And you ever come to a point where you have to tell a student, look, buddy, you're slacking in my class, you're treating me like a clown. I see that you're watching stuff on your laptop that has nothing to do with my class. So I want you to put that away. Or does it come to that? What do you do in a case like that?
Um, that's not that common among university students. By the time they get to the university, they've usually gotten past some of the, kind of more outrageously clownish behavior you might be find in, say, early high school or middle school or something. For the most part, I look at it like this: the student is the customer. I'm essentially their employee. If they want to sleep through class, fine. They're not going to get a good grade, but if they want to sleep through class, that's on them. Um, I've had students come to me at the end of the semester, saying, "I'm failing your class. What can I do to pass?" And I'll look over their grades and I see, well, I see you haven't turned in any assignments this semester. So what do you think you're going to get as far as a grade? So in that sense, though, what I'm doing is I'm teaching the students that they have to take initiative. In fact, I've told students that I'm like, this is not elementary school. I'm not going to call your parents if you have bad grades. It's up to you to keep up with your grades, keep up with your work. If you don't turn in assignments or don't show up for exams, I assume you're not interested. I had a student one time asked me why at the end of a semester, he emailed me and asked me why he failed a class. I went back and looked over his grades, and it turned out he didn't even show up for the final exam. But like I said, I do look at it like the student is the customer. And if the customer wants to not show up for the final exam, that's fine. But they're not going to get a good grade. That's the only downside.
First come, first serve. Your class, you get graded, you do well. You show initiative, you do well. And if you act like an idiot, well, you fail, and it's your loss, and that's all there is to it.
Exactly.
All right, Keith, thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll be in touch. Google us, www.academiccomposition.com. Email us, academiccomposition@gmail.com. Thanks so much, and you'll be hearing from us.